Okay, welcome to Butterfly Stories, episode 3. We've got a guest with us today, our very first guest, and we're absolutely honoured to have him in the studio with us. He's a podcaster, he is a journalist, an author, a documentary maker. Check out his documentaries on the BBC. He is an all-round great guy. Darren McGarvey, or Loki, as he's known as well within the rap scene. Darren, thanks so much for coming to join us today.
It's a pleasure. How are you doing? All right?
Yeah,
good.
Very good.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. It's a lovely studio. And the guys out there like, who the fuck is this guy? I've never heard of him.
This is Grant.
That's what always happens, man. You get the people who know you and they talk about you like you're a big deal, and then there's other people that just don't have a clue who you are, and they're like, man, who the hell is this guy?
Well, it's really surreal for me because I do know you, because I'm really into all the kind of ACEs stuff, so seeing you sitting across from me, I'm like, oh no.
And I think the term is that we have just blown our load out chatting to you out there. We've chatted about everything.
A lot of loads have been blown out there, I think.
So Kelly has met you. She's had the privilege of meeting you before.
I remember.
It was a book signing, yeah. You did at the ACES conference.
I remember it was like Gabor was sitting at one table and I was sitting at the other signing books, and I was getting a wee bit kind of jealous of the queue for his book at the time.
I just jumped into yours because it was a wee queue.
Exactly.
I'm only kidding.
No,
I was delighted.
It's fine.
It's roughly how I feel, Darren, but we've put 2 episodes out so far. Kelly's story was the first one, Marvin's the second one. Kelly's numbers are dwarfing mine. Absolutely dwarfing it, so she's more popular.
Well, the first episode always, I find with my podcast, the first episode just seemed to be more, the algorithm just seemed to enjoy it more. The algorithm was like, right, a new thing. Boom, 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 and then it just starts making you work a wee bit harder. Do you know what I mean? It condition you.
I tried to inflate your ego there a bit, and Darren's just popped it.
It's got nothing to do. It's nothing to do with the story.
Well, I was listening to your podcast, which I just love. See, once I get something I like, I go down a rabbit hole with it, and I just get so intense with it. But the one I listened to was the Janie Godley one, and it was just so beautiful. I just wanted to mention her because she's just such an amazing person, and we watched her documentary recently and it just was absolutely heartbreaking, wasn't it? But
I didn't actually I wasn't like her best mate or anything like that. My association with Janie really came through running into her at green rooms now and again for events that we were both doing, or a few years back when she kind of got involved in quite an intense public controversy, which was not entirely unjustified, but a lot of the people out there who were going after her were going after her for other reasons because of stances that she has politically. And I don't know, I just had a sense as that was going on that she was more vulnerable than people thought, because she had this big character that just seemed bulletproof and had survived so much adversity. And so I think at the time, I was maybe the only person with a public profile who actually defended her and said, look, I'm not excusing what she said. We've all said stupid things. The point is, do people want her to do herself in?
No.
You know what I mean? That's what I felt. I didn't know at the time what was going on behind the scenes. Subsequently, we learned that she was really struggling at that time. And then obviously she would then, not long after that, go on to get the diagnosis, which has obviously brought her life to a kind of an end and far too soon. But a big character and achieved a lot in her short life, no doubt about it.
I know, it was really sad. But when you think about the Caroline Flack stuff, like all the stuff that happened to her in the papers just before, so that was really brave of you to speak up and do that.
Well, it just didn't sit right with me. I was willing to take the criticism because it was just it just seemed kind of strange that after many years of a lot of male public figures, you know, positioning themselves as pro women this and make sure we treat women with respect and make sure that women feel safe, and then just complete deafening silence when it looked to me very clearly that despite her transgressions, which she apologised for, it looked like she was super vulnerable. So obviously there's a bit of a kind of hypocrisy there. We're saying, oh well, we'll protect women as long as they behave the right way, which doesn't seem terribly progressive. But there you go. I think, you know, real compassion is when it's hard. It's easy to be compassionate to people who behave right. Do you know what I mean? Real compassion is when you go to put something on the line in order to try and do the right thing. And I just know my granny and my ma wouldn't have been happy with me if I hadn't said anything.
But then you think, if that was my mum, I would want somebody to step up for her too.
Aye, of course. Don't get me wrong, if it was my mum, I'd be leading the charge to publicly shame her, as I have done. But she's long gone now anyway, and that's just sort of said facetiously. But generally, we all make mistakes. We all have things that we've said or thought or done which in a previous time didn't seem wrong to us. And so I think there's just something fundamentally disingenuous when you're holding someone to account for something that they said a long time ago that they've taken accountability for, and you're trying to portray them as something that they aren't. Yeah. I think that if we're holding each other accountable on those standards, then we're all guilty of sin. And I think, unfortunately, it's going to take for everybody to go through an experience like that for people to realise, actually, this is a dishonest way to conduct ourselves, because people are complicated. We all make mistakes. We're human beings. We're all guilty of ignorance. There are things that we will talk about here today that hopefully in 20 years will have been rendered by the passage of time as an inappropriate way to discuss things, or will involve, a process of learning at different points. That's how we evolve. That's how we change. This idea that we're all just born with the onboard software to know instinctively what is right and wrong, despite our immaturity, despite our ignorance, despite our lack of experience, it's just mind-numbingly dull. Online activism, but most of the activism online is mind-numbingly dull, to be honest.
I was chatting to you about that in the car, like how language even changes over time. Like you said, a lot of the stuff, I said a lot of the stuff when I was kicking about as a wee boy, that things we were saying wouldn't stand the test of time, and it's the intention behind it. There wasn't any malice behind it. It was just language has changed considerably, and that, I won't say how long, just ages me dramatically when I say the time, but it has changed considerably. I suppose we were fortunate that a lot of the things we were kicking about saying at that point wasn't online. You were saying to your pal and your peer group and things like that.
It wasn't being recorded.
Aye.
And I mean that itself will have an impact on how we conduct ourselves in a way that I think is positive. Some people see that as I'll be self-censoring and I feel restricted and I should be completely free just to act out any nonsense that occurs to me in the moment, when actually I think the more we begin to behave online the way we would in a real life situation, the better, because a lot of the problems we have going on culturally right now are because of the disinhibitive effect of social media. People feeling free to say things because they know the consequences aren't going to be immediate. Whereas, there's a natural urge to cooperate with each other that occurs even where there's disagreement when we're in the real world. That's how we've evolved to resolve conflict, whereas online it's just that I can say what I want because that person is not even a human to me, and that person's not going to be able to hold me accountable. And then you add in online anonymity and sock puppet accounts and some of them loudest voices out there who claim that they're fighting for this, that and the next thing. They're hiding behind false identities. They're not putting anything on the line. There's no sacrifice from them. There's just the endless self-masturbation of hearing themselves say things into the void, and just spreading their kind of venom and discord. And the effects of that are enormous, and the Janie situation was one of those situations.
I know, I just feel for teenagers now, because they're probably not even aware, thinking about 10 years down the line and the things that they might put on. They don't realise that they're there forever. Even ones that get deleted, they could get restored and stuff, so they're just so vulnerable to it.
Yeah, and but these are that's part of the process of raising our kids now involves an awareness of the online world and all of the pitfalls involved there, because obviously it offers a great many opportunities for young people in work, leisure, education. It's unparalleled. My son now at 8 years old probably understands more about the world than I did at 16 years old, and that's just because of the digital communication revolution. But obviously with every revolution in technology there is a big underside to it, and that needs to be understood as well. I think the best kind of guardrail for this sort of stuff is just parents and kids having dialogue with each other, making it safe for kids to come to you with a problem, and then being able to discuss things openly. And that's a kind of remedy, that's a panacea for most problems that kids and teenagers will face. They've got to feel that they can come to their parent or caregiver and say, I'm struggling with this thing, or I'm having problems with this thing, and they're not going to, it's not going to be punishment and judgment and retribution most of the time. Sometimes some of those things might be required.
So obviously you're a dad. Like part of this is we know the body of work that's out there that you've got, and it's phenomenal, and I would encourage people to go out there and check that out. But we want to delve into a little bit about you as a person.
Yep.
And you've mentioned you've got kids, so you've got 2 kids. Do you feel like the background that you've got, and hopefully we'll go into your journey to where you are today as a person that's led to the work that you do you feel that has been advantageous in some way, you know, some sort of perverse way, what you've been through to your experience as a dad?
Oh, I mean, of course, partly because you know, you have very clear cut understanding of what was in abundance in your childhood and maybe what was lacking. I came from a one-parent family, single-parent family. My dad raised us, and that meant that the things that he felt more naturally inclined to provide were there in abundance. So my dad was great at encouraging us to be creative. He was a musician. He is a musician and a songwriter. So that was very much encouraged. It was a creative household. We were encouraged to follow our creative impulses, to resist the peer pressure from the scheme, to fall in line in terms of how we dress, how we speak, what we're allowed to admit to being interested in. And all of that was really, really important for me. My dad was also big on physical activity, exercise. He was a marathon runner, a cyclist, until he had an accident about 10 years ago. And so, you know, all of these things were natural. We were encouraged to get out and play and explore. He was big on healthy eating, you know, always a big bowl of fruit available. He was also super strict with what nights of the week that we were allowed to have sweeties and chocolate. And all these things at the time, you just feel that's just overbearing. Do you know what I mean? But actually, when you have your own kids, you realise these are the real battlegrounds.
Absolutely.
You know, and sometimes the thing that's easiest for you is not good for them, and so you start to respect more a parent who stands their ground and says, no, these are the standards. We don't alter them just because we feel tired. We don't alter them just because we don't want to have an argument with a child about why having a cup of hot chocolate at 9 o'clock at night's not good for your sleep. It's all right now and again, but
a wee treat.
Aye, but so he was great with that stuff, and also big on responsibility. You know, if you mess up, you've got to take responsibility for it. Don't go spending money on your girlfriend when you've not paid your digs. And again, sometimes that can feel a wee bit, oh, come on, do you know what I mean? And all my other parents, my friends have all got different setups in their house, and they can come and go, and they've got house keys and credit cards and blah, blah, blah. So that was really great, because that's where, these are the areas where I'm strong with my kids. But obviously with my mother not being there, and then there is something lacking there as well. And it's not necessarily to essentialise women as being able to provide a particular type of security, but two parent families or two caregiver families, obviously there's a fairer division of emotional and physical labour with child rearing. And I think that lack of that leads to stress for the single parent and everything that can entail in a household.
Did you feel that lack at that point in time, or is it now with reflection, or did you feel lack?
No, it wasn't until I left Pollock and was spending time with other families and friends who just had different family situations. Now, obviously, when you go into a family's house, they've got it's front of house service, right? There's a guest in, so the house is clean and everybody's behaving, and so you're getting a false picture of what that family's got, but you do notice little differences. So in some households, there might be greater levels of freedom and autonomy that the kids enjoy, in terms of being able to go in the kitchen and help themselves to things, because they're not operating in an environment where there's scarcity, and so things need to be reserved or rationed. so to speak, because there's just not an endless supply of groceries, you know, when you're feeling, I'll have a snack, and you're just eating cereal every 10 minutes, do you know what I mean? So you notice there's differences in the culture and also in the communication styles. Different families adopt different configurations in terms of what is the chain of command. And so one of the things I noticed was the diversity in a lot of the friends' households, where, you know, sometimes it was it was my pal who was in charge of the gaff, and then other times there was a kind of egalitarianism in the household where, you know, people are free really to do what they want as long as they're playing the game. Yeah. My household, it was a bit different. My dad was the boss, and, you know, if you had to become very manipulative if you wanted to get rid of him, which is a skill I did acquire, to be fair.
I think there's a fine line nowadays, but I'm reflecting it as myself as a parent here, so full disclosure on that. I think there's a fine line between being your kid's pal and being a parent. It sounds very much like your dad was a parent. Yes,
you need that. You need that. Your kid's going to have pals. Mm-hmm. They're not looking to you to be a pal. It might be easier for them in a moment where maybe accountability is required or some kind of boundary or structure. A kid might prefer a pal to administer that sort of stuff, i.e. it's not getting administered. The kid is getting the temporary pleasure of what feels like freedom. Mm-hmm. But in our household we have a good balance. My partner is definitely more on the kind of spontaneous side of things. She's very open to new experiences and actually feels quite restricted by structure and even time itself.
What is that? I don't know what
time blindness. So what we get in our household is a kind of balance where the kids have a set structure and routine from which they can safely deviate and then return to. And we think that's a good balance. Obviously between us as parents, we're always negotiating and managing and sometimes coming into conflict around these things because we are hardwired on either side of this spectrum. But we see the impact that balance has on the children. And I mean, maybe 5-10 years, you know, there'll be studies done and there'll be a whole new range of experts and podcasters who are all saying evidence shows that kids who had a balanced childhood between structure and spontaneity are some of the most neurotic, insufferable people ever. And that's actually a form of abuse, do you know what I mean? But in this golden age, before we get Janie Godley in 20 years, then I'll tell myself a story about how that's good for my kids.
No, I 100% agree with you, because I think if you're too soft, then you're not building any resilience in them. But if you're too strict, they're just going to be filled with anxiety and fear. And I think that's like, you've got this term gentle parenting, and some people might think that's about being like dead soft and just letting them do what they want. For me, it's not. It's about them trusting you, that they can come and speak to you. Yeah. And it doesn't mean that you're always going to say yes. You're going to have to say no, but you're saying no in a more gentle way, that if they're upset about it, you're like, I know that's sad, but we still can't do it. Whereas I would have been, get up to your room.
Yeah, I mean, my take on the general kind of rub of parenting is that you need to be consistent.
Absolutely.
The kids, they appreciate consistency even if they don't like some of the ways that it's expressed. I can tell, particularly with my son, he respects what I say. If I say to my son, he's quite logical, you know, so if he comes to me with a problem and I make a suggestion to him, he will go and implement that. He'll go and try that out, and if that works, then that kind of emboldens his trust in me.
Absolutely.
And that's important. I think that he feels that safety there, but he also has room to make mistakes. Mm-hmm. He also has room to be a child. Yeah. You know what I mean? But it's really just I think that the kid, the child, they need to feel safe and secure above all other things. And in order for that to happen, they need to have a sense that there's someone who understands the world better than they do, someone who can see a wee bit into the middle distance more than they can. Because if they feel like they're solely responsible for predicting all these things, that robs them of their childhood. That's what happened to me at points. I became a kind of manager of things, maybe in my imagination, but I was very much kind of what is this environment? What is going on here? What does that person think? Is this safe? What are all the ways this can go wrong? And so, I mean, a lot of my childhood, I don't have memories of things because I wasn't present. You know, you only retain a memory of something good or bad if you were fully present when it happened, whether it's a traumatic experience or you fall in love or your first kiss or whatever. And so I have just great spells of my life where there are no memories because I wasn't there. I was speculating in my mind, you know what I mean? You
answered the question there, why weren't you present? So just that speculation.
Because you're getting lost in thought.
Yep.
So you're getting lost in thought because you don't know, because you're a child and no one's explained it to you, that very few problems in your life will be solved by thinking about them. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because as human beings, we're naturally curious and speculating, as you say. And when we're driving over here today, and you built up this picture of who Darren McGarvey is in your mind, and Kelly asked, you know, did you enjoy school? Yeah, it was okay. Mm-hmm. But you think all this work that Darren's done, you automatically think, I must have had a shite time at school and just a real hard time of it.
Yeah.
And you've built up that picture already, but school was okay for you.
Well, yeah, the thing about also the perceptions that people have of public figures, it's co-authored. So there's a part of it that comes from me, but then there's part of it that the audience does in their head. So everybody who knows someone has a slightly different version of who that person is. My experience in school was really being distracted. You know, I was a kid that showed a lot of promise. A kid that teachers felt was going places, and actually a lot of my old school friends, you know, having enjoyed the moderate success that I have, a lot of them, you know, say, well, I always knew you were going to go on to do this and that. I didn't feel that though as a kid. I felt a preoccupation with the social environment, a preoccupation with the different peer groups that I was trying to appeal to or manage, in terms of making sure I felt safe and secure and validated and popular. And, you know, so school for me was kind of walking a tightrope where the things that I should have been focusing on got less and less important, and the things that ultimately don't matter that much now were the most important things. And these were thinking habits and behaviours that I carried right through my adolescence, which obviously eventually I medicated with alcohol and drugs.
It's interesting as well because you said earlier on about your dad, and that was one of the big messages he wanted to get across to you in terms of you don't need to fit into these parameters, be your own person. But get into that environment, you're trying to fit in. I think teenagers, you know, we've got 3 teenagers in the house, and you can see that it's difficult to take on board that message because you're into that environment. It's different,
especially when you're growing up in a scheme. It's a whole new level of having to fit in, isn't it? Because it brings in like violence then if you don't. It's a threat.
Yeah, there's there are consequences that go beyond just somebody thinking a certain thing of you.
Aye.
And that's one of the key cultural differences between social classes, where the education experience comes into play, and one of the subtler facets of it that contributes to the educational inequality, because when a kid is preoccupied by the language of violence being present everywhere they go, they can't give sufficient attention to their study, and also it impacts behaviour because there are perverse incentives internally to portray certain facets of themselves, to appeal to peer groups that then bring them into conflict with the rules established within an educational context. Mm-hmm. And that's how an academically bright kid who has a supportive family can still be drawn down a path where, you know, there's quite a bit of work that needs to be done to rectify maybe a few years of fanning about, as they say.
But also, like, you don't want to look like you're too clever, because then you'll be a geek and you'll stand out, and you need to put this toughness up even though inside you're secretly shiting yourself.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I understood dead early on, thankfully, and this was partly probably due to my mother's more radical approach to parenting, which was if you came home upset about a conflict that had happened, she would take you to the person you know what I mean? And the conflict would have to get resolved.
Aye.
And sometimes it'd have to get resolved violently, which is quite traumatic. But there is something, while primitive, kind of beautiful about that really misfiring maternal instinct. My mother understood at a very deep social level the practicality of not being seen to be a victim. Because she understood that in the context of where we grew up, if you look like you could be pushed around, you will be pushed around. No, the minute someone knows you don't want to fight, that's when you get punched in the face. And so she took a very kind of American foreign policy viewpoint of conflicts in the scheme, where it was basically, you know, they're going to know either because you're going to knock them out in the street in front of me, or I'm going to scare the shit out of their parents, that you know, they don't mess with our family. And that was a kind of... That led to me understanding very early on that the way particularly young men flaunt their peacock feathers in schemes, it's all to hide fear. And one of the reasons they clump up in such numbers and get drunk and medicate and end up in the criminal justice system because of things they can't even remember doing, it's all because of fear. Absolutely. Fear of what people think, fear that they're going to get stabbed, fear that somebody's going to cheat, their missus is going to cheat on them. It's insecurity. It's a kind of very fragile masculinity that is reinforced and supplemented with just a high volume of fearful guys all hanging out with each other, telling themselves a story about how they're bold and gallus, when really, you know, the scariest people in a scheme, the ones that don't need alcohol to do scary things, not a lot of people know them, not a lot of people talk to them, they're not out there parading themselves, they're operating in the background, pulling the strings.
Well, I always said that the guys that could actually fight at my school never fought. They didn't need to because they had that presence, that aura about them.
Yeah. It
reminds me, I think the statutes of limitations applies here for your mum putting somebody in a wheelie bin.
Oh, aye. A boy in my class, it was annoying me for ages. My mum marched up to the school, lifted him and put him in a bin.
Amazing.
Didn't it annoy me again?
Oh, that'll be a humbling experience for them, and sometimes maybe a bit of humility can help, doesn't it?
You didn't mess with my mum.
So that you've mentioned they're self-medicating. At what point did that enter your life?
Well, I remember the first drink I remember enjoying was my mum's funeral, and she died of alcoholism at 36. So you can see straight away the generational nature of addiction.
And what age were you then, sorry?
16.
16.
So, I mean, I was right in the thick of adolescence and all the stuff that we're talking about, and then there was just this random grief and bereavement. So I remember enjoying the beer, and not just the beer. I remember enjoying being the centre of everyone's attention and having the suit on and the jacket and being handed the beer by a man and feeling like a man in that weird way that we celebrate manhood in Scotland, which is get paralytic, but as long as you look smart, you're a gentleman. And I remember that day leaving my family and going back to school because I had a buzz about me. You know, I was adrenalised from the grief where I wasn't experiencing sadness. I was experiencing my body protecting me from sadness. Then I had a wee buzz of the alcohol in me. I thought, let's go back to school now and let me trial this version of me that just feels a wee bit more protected and safe. And it wasn't long till I was out of school, and the hip hop scene, residentially unstable, mental health stuff, living in a supported accommodation. And it was really when I was on my own for the first time, maybe a year after my mum passed away, that's when the alcohol started to play the role of a kind of companion, where I would buy it even if I couldn't afford it, just to have it in the house. So it was like an affiliate. It wasn't even drinking it. It was just, there was something safety about having it there. And I would say maybe I'd done 8 or 9 years of drinking and drug using, and maybe 5 or 6 of those I did it addictively and alcoholically. So there was a few years where the consequences weren't as serious, partly because you're young, you don't have a lot of consequences, and you're young, so you're very self-absorbed, and any sort of responsibilities you do have, you're not even thinking about them anyway. But it was run about my mid-20s when I started to recognise I'm thinking about drink a lot. There's not a lot of things I can do without a drink, and when I don't drink, I'm really unhappy. And when I do drink, situations are starting to happen. I'm behaving in ways that don't feel like me, and you know. But then That's only half the battle. Recognising there is a problem, that's the easy part. It's the most important part, but it's the easiest part. We can all stop when the money runs out, or we get flung in the police cells, or there's some catastrophe that happens that for a wee moment creates a window of lucidity where we can see our behaviour. But staying stopped, it's about more than just awareness. You need to really work.
And we spoke about that in the last couple of episodes, like change in life. You know, it doesn't always come in these kind of catastrophic moments. Sometimes it's just the little things in life. And that's quite mature at the age of 22 to come to that realisation. You know, I had my first drink when I was 21. I was a bit older when I first started drinking, but I had a good go after that. Where did you go from there at 22 to after that realisation?
Well, there was various attempts to experiment with drinking in different settings, having different drinks, trying not to use certain drugs, all the sort of stuff that addicts do to rearrange the furniture. Basically, any person, whatever their problem is, they're going to try all the easiest options before they get to the one they know they need to settle on. So if it's a person who's morbidly obese, they're going to try every fad diet and every version of eating chocolate and fast food that they can get away with until they get to the point where they know, actually, this is about lowering my calorie intake, upping my exercise and changing my social situations so that I can save my life. You know what I mean? Instinctively, though, whatever our problem is, we take the path of least resistance because our mind is evolved to keep us comfortable. It's very startling to think that this thing we've used as security for so long will no longer be there. I mean, I still smoke 15, 20 cigarettes a day, and it fills me with anxiety if I feel like if I've not got my cigarette. So I understand that that's still an area I've got to look at. But for me, with the alcohol, I tried everything. I sought mental health diagnosis, both kind of clinical and informal. I got self-medicated with other medications. I told myself really intoxicating stories about my own trauma and social class, and basically trying to attribute the negative consequences of my behaviour to external circumstances, which is ultimately what it's doing. The fundamental problem with that outlook, not that there's not a lot of evidence to support that argument, but there's one important piece that's missing, which is, despite the circumstances that I experienced growing up through no fault of my own, the problem of my alcoholism is mine to solve. The problem of how my trauma manifests in my behaviour and my attitudes is mine to solve. Whether that's fair or not, it doesn't really matter. You have a short time to be alive, and if you're waiting for other people, including institutions, to take responsibility for your life, then you're going to die, you know, at an absolute nick. So I understood in my mid-20s I had a problem. Then it was about experimenting with different ways to solve it until eventually I realised I had to go completely abstinent from alcohol and drugs and mood and mind altering substances. I couldn't use them safely because one always led to another, led to a loss of control, loss of money, sometimes a loss of freedom, loss of relationships, a loss of respect for myself. And, you know, it was in 2013 where I made my first serious attempt to go abstinent. And while there's been bumps in the journey, I've more or less been clean and sober for 10 years.
So for you, is it abstinence from everything? So I've heard people talk about they'll still experiment like with plant medicine and things like that. For you, is it everything?
Some people will experiment with plant medicine, and that's, in my view, still trying to go the path of least resistance, because there is a comfort that you experience when you go, oh, so I can still do that. Do you know what I mean?
Because that's a plant medicine.
What I would like to know is opium not a plant medicine? Do you know what I mean? Like, where does alcohol come from? Do you know what I mean? Like, everything goes back to nature. The question is, what is your motive for doing it?
Aye.
And what happens to you once you do it? Right, so there are some people I know who the problem is alcohol, but they've learned that they can't use drugs because drugs alter the consciousness, which alters the understanding of the fact that you can't mess with alcohol. So if you alter your consciousness, what you're doing is you're changing the parameters of how you think. And that means that thinking that you've built up, where you understand the truth that alcohol is dangerous to you as peanuts, or to somebody with a peanut allergy. You take mushrooms, psilocybin, which is a kind of in-trend thing, that could alter your consciousness. You see a different perspective on it, and while that perspective's interesting and that altered consciousness is enjoyable, and there might be great insights to derive from it, you also open yourself up to thinking you can do things that you can't do, like drink. And, you go back to the psilocybin, and then eventually you think, well, my mind is so powerful, why can't I just think my way out of this? And that's when the ego's totally took control, and you've not realised it. You think you're experiencing a revelation, but the ego has recuperated. It's at the wheel, and you're on your way to relapse. Now, I'm not saying this applies to everybody, but to addicts of my nature, of my type, mood and mind altering substances, maybe with some minor exceptions that are done under the proper circumstances, like ayahuasca ceremonies and stuff like that. But even then, I would say you need to be a good 10 years sober before you go down that route, and you're opening the door to relapse if you do it any other way than the proper way that it's supposed to be done.
I think that's essential, but because there's folk doing these ceremonies in a council flat in Baillieston, it's like, make sure...
They're just freebasing, do you know what I mean? Like, they're just freebasing. Because it's ayahuasca, it's like, oh, it's just drugs, do you know what I mean? You're
exactly.
Just tripping.
Was there a person or a group, like when you stopped drinking, that you went to, or did you just go for it on your own?
I went down the kind of 12-step recovery route, because basically what it offered me was everything that I need to live a decent life, which is humility to accept that I have a problem that I alone do not possess the expertise to solve, encouraging me to be willing to look to others for help, and also that I need to be constantly reminded that while I have the right to prioritise myself in many situations as an individual, just acting on my selfish impulses is partly what makes me sick, because it brings me into conflict with other people, because every time I'm behaving selfishly, it's having a negative impact on someone or something else. And then obviously what the 12 steps also offer is a process for understanding the true damage done to yourself and others through your addiction, a process to make amends for those things, and then a way of living on a daily basis that allows you to remain mindful of the ways that your particular personality flaws can manifest even in your sobriety. So while obviously there are certain stereotypes and perceptions that exist out there about 12 steps, part of that is fueled by the fact that we have an over-reliance on a medical model for everything now. So anything that basically doesn't rely on medical models or medication is kind of viewed sceptically. When the truth is, you've got as much chance of getting sober through that method in churches and community centres and Sunday nights with people who are not doctors as you do with an entourage of wraparound support totaling tens of thousands of pounds a year. And that's not just me talking out my arse. That's, that's borne out in the facts.
Aye, absolutely. It's a community, and it's been part of something that helps you. And I think that's what a lot of people are missing, because maybe a lot of people don't feel that they're bad enough on drink to go to AA, but there's a lot of people that are still using it at the weekends, like in not a good way, but that's their way of connecting to people, going to the pub and stuff.
Yeah.
How do you fill that?
But the key thing that differentiates the alcoholic or the addict from the temperate normal drinker and even the binge drinker is that in certain circumstances, the binge drinker and the temperate drinkers will just forego alcohol because they have a health problem, because they behaved in a certain way that they're ashamed of, because somebody in their families decided, what about if we just stop drinking? And that's not a big decision to make. Mm-hmm. It might be difficult at first in an adjustment. The difference with the alcoholic addict is that they lose the ability to do very much in their life without their substance or without the promise of their substance at the end of it. So you get some people who call themselves functional alcoholics, but take the alcohol away from them and see how they function. You know what I mean? Like, the reason that they're functioning is because everything that's going on in their life allows them to keep up the pretense that alcohol's not the thing they're thinking about all the time, that alcohol's not the thing that every aspect of their life is situated around. So they're motivated to work, they're motivated to do all the things they do, but it's all just so that at the end of it all they'll be left alone to drink. Mm-hmm. Something
I found really profound that you said to me earlier, and you mentioned it briefly there, is even you at this stage now in your journey, it's daily. It's every day at a time, and it's daily practice of what you're doing. How important is that in your journey?
Well, I mean, it's important, and this is some of the stuff that people who come into recovery, or they're looking at possibly the sort of recovery that I do, they start to feel overwhelmed by the thought of it, because they see it as work and it's a big shift. When we're talking about a daily basis, we're talking about the reality of life. We only have the day we're in, right? If I'm spending most of my day lost in thought, worrying about the future, regretting the past, then I'm just walking around in a dream, but I'm actually awake. And so there's a real practicality in keeping things in the day and keeping things in the moment. Now, it's not easy because we've got a mind that has to think and anticipate things. And we've got a mind that has to reflect back in order to go, what direction is my life going based on where I've been. But for me, what I don't deal with anymore is am I going to drink the day? Do you know what I mean? I would need to be bent out of shape for a few months of not doing the stuff that I need to do, which is, for me, keeping in regular contact with other people who are managing this condition, which keeps me in a place of awareness about the truth, because a symptom of the mental side of the illness of addiction is that it wants the sufferer to forget that it's the problem. So in this culture we have just now of mass self-diagnosis of everything, this, that and the next thing, the path of least resistance for the alcoholic is to diagnose themselves with complex PTSD, or to diagnose themselves as neurodivergent, or to diagnose themselves as suffering from some other grave clinical medical health problem that no doctor seems to be able to pick up on. When deep down they know I'm drinking too much and I'm smoking too much hash and I'm getting out my nut on gear 3 nights a week and I'm getting it delivered to my work, and they have a vague sense that that's the problem. But the mental side of addiction is, it's like a monster that's hiding in a dark room. It's going to move to wherever the light's not being shone. It's going to keep it of you. It's going to present whatever excuse it can, and sometimes very plausible ones. And that's not to say there's no trauma. That's not to say there's no ADHD or whatever. But it's to say that a lot of people who are really struggling in life just now, they don't have insight into the role that addiction is playing. And to be quite frank, neither do a lot of the medical professionals who are charged with helping them. And so it means that some people get lost in a search for a diagnosis or a label, because they would take schizophrenia over just, I'm a jakeball. Do you know what I mean?
Because there's no accountability with the labels then. It's no their fault. It's something they've been born with. And since I've started doing all the work around trauma and ACEs, I feel like I walk about with these trauma goggles and I'm like, they've got trauma and they've got trauma, but obviously you're not going to say that to people. But I start seeing things completely differently, and it helped me understand what I'd been through. But I think that's something that you've been doing a lot of, trying to bring that awareness so people can see why they might be behaving the way they are.
Oh yeah, the people who come into the rooms of recovery, where you'll find me a couple of nights a week, obviously a lot of them have got a trauma, and it's not even early childhood trauma. It's the trauma of all the things that they had to become in order to survive the dark world of addiction, right? And this is particularly true of people who have addictions to highly stigmatised substances like heroin and methadone, where there's a person with a heroin addiction, they are pursuing a fix multiple times a day at great expense. 150, 200 quid they need to come up with on a daily basis, or they're going into withdrawal. And the withdrawal that they're going into is physical torture and hell. And when people see what they call a junkie on the street, they're seeing the kind of exterior, which is an inconsiderate, messy looking person who has a reputation for causing problems in the community, and that's all proper, that's right? And when they come into recovery, we help them to address all that sort of stuff. But in the first instance, what you're dealing with somebody who's effectively behaving like a zombie, somebody who basically can't even detect the other problems in their life, because the addictive mind only sees the promise of the fix as relief to the threat of withdrawal. That's it. They're trapped in that hamster cage, and it doesn't matter what happens to them. Heroin addicts in communities are some of the most compliant people in a community. there are actually very few of them who are going to get into a conflict with you. They learn to be compliant because they're so used to being abused. They're so used to being marginalised. I mean, it's one of the things that I watch changing in people who've went through that experience in recovery, getting more confidence, having boundaries. Because at first, they really kind of take a position of complete deference to everybody around them, because they don't trust themselves, they don't have any inner compass, they've just been acting out this use cycle for so long, and it would surprise people who have such a negative viewpoint of heroin users to see what they're like when they come into early recovery and see just, you know, how battered and bruised they've been and what they've been through.
That's heartbreaking, isn't it? Like, I hate that word. Like, I hate when people look down on these people, and I'm like, would anybody choose to be in that lifestyle? That's not a choice, that is a survival.
Of course.
I think there's a huge contradiction in that the way that you describe all the labels and everything like that, it's almost like a smokescreen for people getting to the root of what their issue might be. So they've got that smokescreen of that and trying to find a label that fits them, but then you've got the other people, the common man on the street walking by judging these people, and they don't look for that label. They don't think they might have trauma or ADHD or whatever it might be. They just use words like junkie and things like that, and judge these people and use like crass terms like that, to be honest.
Yeah, and you know, I'm all for, see if you're living a morally upright life, and you're of service to your community, and you emotionally show up for your children, and you're reliable with your employer, and you're an upstanding citizen, then you've got a wee bit more latitude to be judgmental and expect other things for other people. The people who tend to judge drug addicts the most harshly are the people who are out fucking getting totally off their face at the weekend on alcohol, which is just a legal drug. Do you know what I mean? So it fundamentally, sometimes the thing about the person in the community that annoys us the most is the fact that they are a reflective surface to something within us. And that's a kind of that you'd have a hard time standing on a street corner around here making that argument. Do you know what I mean? But that's the truth. The truth is that often people don't want to admit that addiction and alcoholism is more like a mental illness, because it means that they might need to look at themselves. And so, you know, some of the people who get the most kind of up in arms about a policy like minimum pricing, which on its own isn't going to solve the problem, but the big argument they make is this is having no impact on the serious drinkers. But it is having an impact on everybody else, because everybody in Scotland is actually a serious drinker. So if you're complaining about the fact that it's costing more, you're drinking less, and that is manifesting as health benefits further down the line. Of course, there's a cohort of people who are going to do it and to get their substance. They're going to do it and to drink. We understand that. But what the person moaning about a policy like that doesn't understand is it was never really just about targeting the hardcore drinkers. It was about targeting the general population and leading to a general constraining of our appetite for alcohol by hitting us in the pocket. On its own, a policy like that's not going to work, and the government's not going far enough with other stuff. But it was interesting seeing all the counter arguments coming from people who clearly drink too much and just the lack of understanding that, you know, because really that's the subtlety of alcohol. We call it kind of cunning, right? What it's doing is it's trying to tell you a story to justify things and say that's no me, I'm not that kind of drinker. And that's how it meddles with us, that's how it messes with us, and that's how we end up living in, you know, for serious alcoholics like myself, we end up living really deeply dishonest lives, and that makes us very, very unhappy.
I find that quite funny because we've no drank for 3.5 years now, and that was just like was like fed up with feeling rotten at the weekends and stuff like that, nothing major, but the reaction for some people, so my main group of pals, they've been totally fine, they're just like that, yes, I've got a lift home for a night out, I don't need to worry. But other people, like the
What's
pressure,
up with you? What's wrong with you?
Folk coming for dinner on a Monday night, no, just have a beer, and I'm like, I think you need to have a word with yourself.
Because you want to flip that conversation round and be like that to people. You alright? I mean, you're poisoning yourself every night, and there's lots of negative consequences associated with this behaviour, but you're trying to get me to participate. Is everything okay with you? Do you know what I mean?
Like that way I'd built that narrative about you, like who Darren McGarvey was in my mind, and he can't have a good time at school and that. People build that narrative about people that don't drink. Oh, he must have been beating her up or something like that, he's been tanning her with whiskey bottles and stuff, where it's just like, nah, do you know what?
All day on a Sunday.
I can't deal with hangover. I feel depressed for days after it because
Yeah.
alcohol's a depressant. Don't want to feel like that anymore.
And it's nice to hear, you know, a couple talking about how they made a decision together, and it wasn't necessarily based on a big crisis moment. It was just based on, look, this isn't serving us, and just kind of gone with that. You know what I mean? Because it's difficult. I mean, I experienced a lot of realignments and readjustments in various relationships as a result of trying to get sober and stay sober. And it meant, you know, I had to love some people from a distance, and it also meant, you know, in closer relationships that, you know, I've got to be aware of what's going on around about me, and having the strength to say, you know what I mean, not necessarily trying to police other people's behaviour, but just saying, you know, there's certain things that don't work for me as a person that's trying to stay sober, and really kind of prizing that sobriety and recognising that actually everything in my life that is good comes from my sobriety. So the sobriety is the priority. It's a non-negotiable. You know, I have a couple of groups that I'm heavily involved in, I do service in, and I'm available to people in the community who want to contact me. And that's actually, in those moments, that's when I feel the most real, that's when I feel the most authentic. Because everything else, you're playing a wee bit of a character. You got a different character for your partners, you do for the people you work with, and then your kids, and there's all these different facets. They're all real, but you lean into one side of yourself a wee bit more depending on who you're talking to. In recovery, when you're watching somebody come in the door and they're battered and they're broken, and then you see them 1 week, 2 weeks, 30 days, as somebody who's been battering on about changing the world since they're knee high, I've not saw a lot of change. The change I see every day in the recovery community, it's real, it's tangible, it's miraculous, and I've learned that more and more I need to be performing that role in my community anonymously rather than a lot of the public grandstanding that a lot of us have got involved in, which feels good, but my nervous system's getting a bit fed up with it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel quite calm and comfortable in a room where nobody's giving me special treatment as a result of who I am. I'm an equal among peers, and I need that. I need that humbling experience regularly, because I've got an ego that's always recuperating and it always wants to take the wheel and like, let's whip everybody into shape. Oh yes.
I wanted. Sorry, on you go.
No, I was just wondering how you managed to, like, how you started on your kind of journey with all the trauma work and the ACEs.
Well, actually, I used to listen to Gabor Mate when I was trying to go to sleep, when I was strung out from drinking, and I found his voice quite soothing, and also I found it quite comforting to start discovering a possible explanation for why I wasn't able to function in normal life without the use of substances. And it wasn't that I wasn't able to function, it was that I just didn't find life enjoyable. There was too many things that made me uncomfortable, you know, being in relationships, meeting new people, having responsibilities. I just felt like I could never keep my side of the bargain with all these things for one reason or another. And so that was the sort of the kind of pre-recovery phase of starting to understand the trauma language and that discourse that now is commonplace. But then obviously when I then sort of moved into the sobriety and then became a writer sort of professionally, it became part of my job, you know. It was an essential thing to contextualise antisocial behaviour, addiction. You had to contextualise it as there's social conditions here which mean that there's a higher probability people will experience wounds and needs won't be met, and this will manifest later as ABC type of behaviour, and when you're making an argument about social inequality, then it's really important. So the big thing a lot of people remember about my first book was me saying, the one thing people don't talk about when they talk about the poor is how the poor are always in a stress response, and in a stress response you can't make reasonable decisions. You can't resolve conflict without high aggression. You can't even metabolise food without gaining at the stomach. These are all things physiologically that occur when you're in a stress response. And I just thought that was a commonplace insight. But to a lot of people, particularly people, experts, people who are in the lived experience field, people who care about public health and all that, they thought that was a really key insight that was expressed in an accessible, understandable way as a result of me having lived experience of seeing it. And so that's really how I kind of fell into that. I started to understand, right, okay, my place in this culture and discourse is, I'm somebody who is as smart as an academic, even though I'm not trained. I have the ability to think at that level, but I have a lived experience and an understanding of the culture I come from. So I can create a bridge between these two worlds where I can take this highfalutin language and get it ball on deck for people here, while also taking some of the behaviours and some of the attitudes that I see here and translate it into this language for the decision makers. And really that's what my whole raison d'etre is in this discourse now. I
think you're unique in that, reflecting some of your more recent work. We watched the documentary The State We're In, which is phenomenal, and it is that, as you say, it's translating it both ways, but it's coming from a voice of somebody, as you say, has got a lived experience. So it's a unique position you've got. But did you find that, you wrote your first book, did you find that, having had the background that you had socially, did you find it difficult to break through and have your book published, your contact with the BBC, have documentaries made there? Was that a difficult route?
It was difficult, partly because you don't plan ahead of what you're trying to do. I mean, really, I started out as a musician, a rapper, a hip hop artist, and that's what I was pursuing. But then I got sober, went to college, studied journalism, and other opportunities started to open up. I kind of came through as social media was just seen as this amazing radical technology where we all have a voice, and the algorithm was very generous. And so I gained an audience through social media, which then gave me a wee bit more leverage when it came to opportunities like book deals and newspaper columns, because people could see I had an audience. And really that's the opportunities then came through that. I lost a lot of opportunities as well coming from my background in the arts. Nobody really, there's not much interest in a rapper with a Scottish accent, do you know what I mean? For some reason you got a lot of people out there who think they're cultured, but that idea they just cannot wrap their fucking head around. So there's a lot of doors getting slammed, a lot of understanding that, what's seen as passion and conviction in one side of culture is seen as aggression and danger in another, more kind of safe space, middle class, Creative Scotland funded culture. And just always having to see everything in that dichotomy all the time is exhausting. So it was great when the Poverty Safari became the success that it did, because it quietens the critics. They no longer have any clout to stop you getting opportunities, because you are becoming, you generate opportunities by just your mere existence. And then what that did was just open life up for me right at a time when my first kid was just born, and being able to provide that security for them, but also really to go, basically every option you could ever want was on the table. So the last few years have just been me trying things to see what I'm into, and I like doing the TV stuff, but maybe no every year, you know what I mean? And I like doing the book stuff, but I'm not going to be knocking out a book every 12 months because I don't want to be rich, I don't want to be famous. I'm not driven by that. I like doing the work. I realise there's a visibility that necessitates it. But we were saying in the car, I'm learning, my nervous system's telling me I'm not wired to be a household name. I could pursue that if I wanted. I have the contacts, I have the recognition in the industry. If I wanted to be going for spots on Question Time every couple of months, and going for spots on Have I Got News For You, and going on for spots, positioning myself as somebody who's a face that's always appearing on your telly all the time. No, that wouldn't take long for me to do that, but I'm not driven to do that. I'm not trying to create a little industry. What I'm trying to do is make a comfortable living doing stuff that matters to me, where I don't have to boil everything down to the lowest common denominator all the time to meet a mass audience. And that my nervous system thanks me for that.
I think it's always asking yourself, and this is something that I always do, is saying, why am I doing this? Am I doing it because I want to be noticed, or am I doing it because I want to help people? So I think for you, it sounds like you're doing the same.
Aye, there's a lot of people out there, and really anybody who's on the telly all the time, whatever reason they tell you they're on the telly all the time, they're on the telly all the time because they want to be on the telly all the time. Now, they'll say it's because I want people to see my comedy, or it's because I care a lot about this and it. So, but actually you have to opt in to be that visible. And some people, they obviously, whatever the benefits are, they outweigh the negatives, and that's why they continue to do it. But I've recognised you can get trapped. You can get trapped in that. You can get trapped in feeling that your value comes from how relevant you are. And having experienced the pull and the temptation of that, and the benefits and the negatives, I realised that the most important work and the most rewarding work for me is the stuff that I initiate myself. It's the stuff that I conceive, develop and execute. And actually it's most rewarding because I have complete creative control over it, and that means my relationship with the audience is purer, less mediated by producers and cameras and all that sort of stuff. And it might not be immediately more lucrative, but in the long run, if you own your own touring career, you know what I mean, in the long run, that's a good thing. I've not signed any of that over to anybody, and I toured the UK last year and I did 25 shows and 24 of them sold out. I wasn't playing arenas, but I kept every penny of that money. Do you know what I mean? And that's why I didn't need to work that much this year.
How does that feel, playing that instant feedback from a live audience? Do you prefer doing that to the documentary stuff?
Aye. No, documentary stuff's great, and you get access to a lot of resources and researchers and producers and logistics that would be impossible to organise yourself. But I love nothing more than being on stage with the audience where I can't see them. It's a dark room, and I'm just taking the ball for a walk. Do you know what I mean? Honestly, that's what I love the most. That's where I feel most free, and that's the most rewarding thing. And I need to start doing things more in line with that, because, as I say, my nervous system thanks me for that, rather than being addicted to being in the fight response with millions of viewers watching you on a political panel show where you get 3 minutes to speak and there's no way you can say it and sensible in that time. Do you know what I mean? So it's bullshit, man.
It's good that you're aware though, and you're like aware of your own body and how it's responding, and can act on that. Are you planning anything just now? Are you working on anything?
Working on a third book about lived experience, and hoping to, you know, throw the cat among the pigeons in a helpful way with the whole lived experience trauma discourse that's really erupted over the last few years. But coming at it from a lived experience perspective, you know, what is it like to be a person with lived experience? Because we don't hear about what the toll it takes on people and what the incentives are to keep telling your story even when it no longer feels true to you, or it becomes a performance. And also this culture of, you know, mass self-diagnosis and everyone trapped in the awareness building phase of recovering from something, because the next part is the hard part where you need help and guidance and you open yourself up to criticism, and everybody just wants to stay at the point where they're learning all the terminology and all the labels that they apply to everybody else, but nobody wants to, here's how you work this stuff. Here's a hard truth you don't want to hear. You're not a victim in every situation you're in. Do you know what I mean? Like, and so a book about that. You know what I mean?
I can't wait to read that.
This has been the fastest hour in my life. Well, honestly, we could have a 4-parter, I think.
I know, I could speak to you all day.
So I think we'll just finish it with advice. You know, any advice you would have for people out there. Perhaps they're in the thick of it just now and they're looking for a way out. If you get any advice you could give people?
Do the opposite of what your head's telling you. Your head's telling you don't tell anybody you're struggling, tell somebody you're struggling. Your head's telling you you're better off staying on your own, nobody understands. Get out, meet new people, get in yourself into a social group, join a gym, join a walking group. There's something in your community that exists that you don't know about that's probably going to be the key to feeling better. Go and find it and do it. The food you're eating that you think's good for you is probably no, and it's and pretty much if you're anything like me, the thing your head's telling you today is the thing that feels good in the moment. It's the thing that feels easy in the moment, and that's that. When you add up all the instances where you act on the impulses, that's the whole bedrock of your unhappiness a lot of the time. And that's the case no matter your economic circumstances. There is something that we can always do, no matter what the situation is, where we can make things a wee bit easier for ourselves. So a good rule for me is just ignore 90% of what comes out of my head and follow a plan.
Brilliant. Okay.
I love it.
Thanks so much, Darren, for your time.
You.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Pleasure.